Welcome, we're so happy you tuned in tonight. Before we get started, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Now, let's get comfortable and drift into deep, peaceful sleep together. The wind cuts across the hilltop like a knife-testing skin, and somewhere in that cold whistle you might hear a boy's voice if you know how to listen for the parts that don't belong. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start where it always starts, with loneliness and the terrible discovery that a single word can make you matter. The sheepfold sits at the crest of a hill that overlooks a village of stone houses clustered around a church, with a bell the colour of old bones. Thin pines mark the tree line like stitches holding the sky to the earth, and beyond them, nothing but wind and the shapes wind makes when it has nowhere else to go. This is where the boy tends his flock, 73 sheep that all look the same in twilight, moving like a single organism with too many legs. He knows each one by the notch in its ear or the pattern of mud on its hindquarters, but knowing them doesn't make them company. Sheep don't talk back. Sheep don't care if you exist. So when the boy first discovers what happens when you scream, "Wolf!" from the top of the hill, it feels like finding magic. The word tumbles down the slope, gaining speed, and by the time it reaches the village square it's become something else entirely. An alarm, a summons, a reason to drop what you're holding and run. The bell clangs. Torches bloom in doorways. Men with pitchforks and women with kitchen knives come scrambling up the path, breathing hard, calling out to ask if he's hurt, if the flock is safe, if he needs help. For those few minutes while they search the tree line and count the sheep, and finally realise there's no wolf at all, the boy is the centre of everything. They're angry when they leave, sure, muttering about wasted time and foolish children, but they came. They all came. And that matters more than their anger. He does it again 3 days later because the silence has become unbearable, and because he wants to see if it works twice. It does. Fewer people this time, and they arrive slower, suspicious, but they still come. The bell still rings. His name still means something when he shouts it into the void. The third time only the watchman bothers to climb the hill, and he doesn't even bring a weapon, just stands there with his arms crossed, shaking his head, before turning back without a word. The boy watches him go and feels something tighten in his chest that might be shame or might be the first thread of something darker. So what do the villagers do? They adapt. They learn. They hold a meeting in the church where the boy isn't invited, and they decide that a voice without consequence is just noise. The elders, 3 men and 2 women who've outlived their children and their optimism, pass a new rule. Answer only for blood, never for noise. The watchman ties the bell rope up high where small hands can't reach it. He wraps the clapper in thick cloth so even if someone manages to pull the rope, the sound comes out muffled, uncertain, easy to ignore. They teach their children not to turn when a voice calls from the hilltop. They train their ears to distinguish real alarm from false. And just like that, the boy becomes irrelevant. A shepherd without a voice, a warning system unplugged. Here's where the story usually ends in the versions you know, with the boy learning his lesson when a real wolf arrives and no one believes him. Poetic justice, moral clarity, a neat little punishment that fits the crime. But the world doesn't always follow those rules, does it? Sometimes the punishment doesn't fit. Sometimes it sprawls out into shapes that make no sense, that follow dream logic and nightmare physics, that teach lessons nobody wanted to learn. The 4th time the boy cries, "Wolf," is different. He does it out of spite mostly, out of a bitter desire to prove that he still exists even if they've decided to pretend he doesn't. He cups his hands round his mouth and screams the word into the gathering dusk, watches it roll down toward the village where lights are starting to bloom in windows. And then he waits for the echo. It comes back wrong. The hill has always had an echo. These slopes are built for it, stone and space and the right angle of wind, but this time the return sounds delayed, like someone had to think about it first. "Wolf," he shouts, and a few seconds later he hears "wolf." But it's softer, wetter somehow, like the word has been chewed before being spit back out. There's breathing between the syllables, not wind, breathing. The sheep hear it too. All 73 heads lift at once, ears swivelling not toward the boy but toward the tree line where the echo seems to originate. They stare into the pines with that blank intensity, animals reserved for things humans can't see, and then slowly, one by one, they look back at him, watching, waiting for him to understand what they already know. He doesn't sleep well that night, lies in his shelter, 3 walls of stacked stone and a roof of pine branches that leak starlight, and listens to the sheep shuffle and snort in the dark. Somewhere past midnight he hears footsteps circling the fold, slow and methodical, but when he peers over the low wall he sees nothing except shadows that might be moving or might be playing tricks with his exhausted eyes. The dog, usually quick to bark at anything, stays pressed against his leg and refuses to make a sound. Morning reveals the first real evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with the world. The boy does his usual inspection of the fence line, checking for gaps or weak boards, and that's when he notices the tracks. Hoof prints from the sheep are normal, clustered around the water trough and the feeding area. But there are other prints too, wolf prints, large and deep in the soft earth. They shouldn't be there. The fence is intact, nothing got in. But that's not the part that makes his skin crawl. The wolf tracks start from his own footprints, not beside them, from them. As if something stepped out of his shoes and walked away wearing a different shape, and they're facing the wrong direction, pointed back toward the shelter he had walked from, as if the ground is replaying his journey in reverse. He follows them with growing unease, watching as they loop around the pen twice, 3 times, before disappearing into the tree line. Near the pines they change. The paw prints become deeper, more real, less like tracks and more like wounds in the earth. And there, barely visible in the soft moss, he sees what might be claw marks or might be letters from his own name carved into the bark of a fallen log. He tells himself it's nothing. Tricks of light and a guilty conscience. He's heard stories about shepherds who spend too long alone on hilltops, who start seeing things that aren't there because the isolation eats holes in their perception. That's all this is. Stress and solitude conspiring to make mountains out of mud. But the bell won't ring for him anymore. He discovers this by accident the next evening when a real emergency happens. One of the ewes gets her leg caught in the fence and breaks something, bone showing white through wool. The boy runs to the church, grabbing the rope before he remembers it's tied up high, and when he pulls with all his weight it comes loose in his hands, crashing down in a coil of hemp and knots. He grabs it, yanks hard, and feels the resistance of the clapper swinging inside the bell's bronze cavity. But no sound comes out. Or rather, sound comes out, but it slides past his ears without catching, like trying to hold water in your fist. He pulls again. Nothing. The rope feels wrong too, slippery, oily, like it's coated in something his fingers can't grip properly. It slithers through his hands no matter how hard he squeezes. The watchman, passing by on his rounds, sees the boy struggling and frowns, walks over, takes the rope and pulls. The bell sings out clear and bright across the village, summoning help that arrives too late to save the ewe, but early enough to confirm what the boy already suspects. The sound refuses him specifically. The village noise has edited him out, so he stops trying to call for help and starts looking for other kinds of answers. That's how he ends up in the pine woods on a morning when mist hangs between the trees like wet cloth, searching for the source of the echo that speaks with breathing between its words. He doesn't find the echo finds him. It takes the shape of something thin and grey that moves between the trunks without disturbing the branches. Not quite wolf, not quite smoke, existing in that uncertain space where metaphor becomes flesh. It doesn't approach directly, just circles slowly, watching him with eyes that reflect light wrong, showing colours that don't exist in normal spectrum. And then it speaks, but not with words. The communication happens directly, thought to thought, like someone pressing ideas into soft clay. The boy, desperate for any acknowledgement that he still exists, starts to complain. About the village that won't listen, about the bell that won't ring, about the isolation that's eating him alive. The grey shape listens with what might be sympathy or might be hunger. It's hard to tell the difference when you're dealing with things that don't follow human rules. And when he's done venting, when he's emptied himself of resentment and fear, the shape makes an offer, hearing in exchange for being heard less. It sounds reasonable in the moment. Sounds like a fair trade. The boy is so tired of being ignored that he'd agree to almost anything for the promise of acknowledgement, even from something that shouldn't exist. He laughs and accepts, thinking it's all symbolic anyway, that nothing will really change. Just words in the mist. Just a lonely shepherd talking to shadows because there's no one else left to talk to. But that's not how bargains work, is it? Not when you make them with things that wear existence loosely, that slip between what is and what isn't like smoke through screens. The quieting starts small. His footsteps on the stone path make less sound than they should. His coughs when dust gets in his throat come out muffled, like he's wrapped in invisible cotton. The dog stops responding when he whistles, just stares at him with confused eyes before trotting off to do its own thing. When he calls the sheep to move them to fresh grazing, they take longer to respond, as if his voice has to travel a greater distance to reach them, even though he's standing right there. And the echo gets closer. Each time he makes a sound, any sound, the return comes faster and clearer until he can't tell if he's hearing his own voice bounce back or something else using his voice to call to him. It starts to arrive before the original sound finishes, overlapping, creating harmonies that shouldn't be possible with a single voice. Sometimes at night he lies awake and hears himself talking in the distance, having conversations he doesn't remember starting, saying things he never thought. The sheep notice. Of course the sheep notice. Animals always know when the world has gone sideways. Their behaviour becomes erratic, unpredictable. He counts them every morning and evening, standard practice, 73 heads plus the ram, but the count keeps ending wrong. 99, then back to 97. The numbers don't add up no matter how many times he recounts, and 2 of the lambs, the ones born late in spring, start chewing with their mouths closed, moving their jaws in rhythm with nothing visible between their teeth. They watch him while they do it. Just watch, unblinking, with expressions that seem too knowing for animals that should barely have thoughts. He's starting to understand that he's made a terrible mistake, that the bargain he thought was metaphorical is entirely literal. But by then it's too late to back out. You can't unmake deals with things that exist in the spaces between reality. You can only wait to see what they'll cost. Boredom and spite drive him to cry, "Wolf!" One more time. He knows no one will come, knows the village has built walls of indifference around his voice. But he does it anyway because the alternative is accepting that he's been erased. And erasure feels like a kind of death he's not ready for. So he climbs to the highest point of the hill, fills his lungs with cold air and screams the word into the valley. "Wolf!" The echo comes back fractured. "Wolf!" 2 voices, 2 mouths, speaking with slightly different timing so the word arrives in pieces. And behind him, close enough to feel the air displacement, he hears something moving through grass that doesn't bend under its weight. He turns slowly, heart hammering against his ribs, and sees fresh claw marks on the nearest pine trunk. Deep gouges that glisten wet in the failing light. They're arranged in patterns that look deliberate, that look almost like letters, and when he squints he can make out shapes that might spell parts of his name. He runs. Not down to the village. That would be pointless. But back to the sheepfold, where at least there are walls and a gate he can bar. The dog is already there, pressed against the back wall, shaking. The sheep have huddled together in a tight mass, facing outward with their heads lowered like they're preparing to defend against something. They don't look at him when he arrives. They look past him, at whatever is following. Panic makes him stupid. He grabs his knife, a small thing meant for cutting rope and trimming hooves, and runs back down to the village anyway. Crashes into the first house he reaches, the elder's cottage with its blue shutters and herb garden. His hand is bleeding where he cut it on the fence in his rush, and he holds it up as proof, as evidence, as the blood they said they'd answer for. The elders look at the wound, look at his face. And one of them, the oldest woman with silver braids and eyes like chips of flint, shakes her head slowly. "You used paint before," she says, and there's no anger in her voice, just exhaustion. Just the weariness of people who've been fooled too many times to trust evidence. He tries to explain, words tumbling over each other, about the echo and the tracks and the thing in the pines that knows his name. They listen politely, faces blank, and then gently but firmly guide him back outside. Other families have been watching from their windows, and now they pull their children away from the glass, teaching them not to look when a voice calls from the road, training the next generation to ignore him. He's become a cautionary tale that's still alive, still screaming, still desperately trying to matter. That night, fog climbs the hill like something living. It doesn't roll or drift. It climbs, deliberately, with purpose, flowing uphill against physics. The sheep sense it coming and press against the gate, trying to break through, trying to flee anywhere else. The dog has disappeared entirely, probably ran off to the village where at least the rules make sense. The boy stands alone in the pen with his useless knife and his erased voice, watching the white wall advance. The echo arrives before the sound. That's how he knows it's close. He hears his own voice calling "Wolf" from somewhere in the mist before he opens his mouth, and then his actual cry joins it, overlapping, harmonizing, two versions of the same word spoken by two versions of the same throat. And something heavy moves through the grass without bending a single blade, leaving no tracks, existing in the space between presence and absence. Then the wolf steps out, its thin as starvation, grey as ash, with eyes that reflect the moon wrong, showing daylight colours in the dark. And when it opens its mouth, the boy's voice comes out. Perfect pitch, perfect tone. "Wolf," it says, mimicking him exactly, and the sound rolls down to the village where not a single window opens, where not a single door cracks to check. The boy tries to scream a warning, a real one, but when he opens his mouth, two voices emerge, his and the wolf's, speaking in unison. He can't tell which is the original anymore. Can't tell if he's making the sound or just echoing something else that speaks with his stolen throat. Down in the village, the church bell rings once. No one touched the rope. The clapper is still wrapped in cloth, but it swings anyway, strikes stone with a sound like broken teeth, and the note that emerges is wrong. Too low, too wet, like the bell itself is bleeding. The elders hear it and decide it's weather, some trick of wind and acoustics. They tell their families to stay inside. Windows shutter, ears turn away from the hill. The rule is clear. Answer only for blood, and they can't see his blood from this distance, can't verify it's real, so they wait. On the hilltop, the boy and the wolf circle the sheep pen. He runs clockwise, the wolf paces counterclockwise on the outside. Wherever he moves, the echo appears ahead of him, cutting off escape. The boards of the fence creak like ribs expanding and contracting. The sheep have stopped moving entirely, pressed their eyes shut like they're refusing to witness what comes next, like they know that seeing will make them complicit. The boy has one thing left to bargain with. Not much, but something. He climbs onto the fence rail, balances there with the wolf on one side and his flock on the other, and makes the offer aloud so the universe has to hear. "Take my voice. Leave the flock." The grey shape stops pacing, considers. The mist swirls around them both, and for a moment the boy thinks maybe it won't accept. Maybe there's no trade left to make. But then the wolf moves closer, opens its mouth impossibly wide and breathes into him. He feels the cold air travel down his throat into his lungs, settling there like ice crystals forming from the inside out. When he tries to scream, only a whisper emerges. When he tries to whisper, nothing comes out at all. His voice has been scooped out like seeds from a melon, leaving only hollow space where sound should live. But the wolf can speak now. It has his voice completely, wears it like a coat stolen from a clothesline, and when it calls wolf, down to the village the sound is identical to all the false alarms that came before. The boy runs again, desperate, voiceless, with only action left. He sprints to the church and grabs the bell rope with both fists, pulls with all his weight, yanking until his hands blister and bleed. No sound emerges. The bell swings silent overhead, metal touching metal with all the noise of clouds colliding. He can see it moving, can feel the vibration through the rope, but his ears receive nothing. The sound refuses to reach him, so he does something insane. He wraps both arms around the bell itself. It's not that large, maybe 2 feet tall, bronze gone green with age, and lifts it off its mounting, heavier than expected, heavy enough that he staggers under the weight, but he manages, drags it across the church floor, stone screeching against stone, carving a groove in the ancient tiles. People inside their homes hear nothing but feel it, a vibration in their teeth, a pressure in their skulls, the sensation of sound without the sound itself. Some of them, the ones whose instincts haven't been completely trained away, start to open their doors, start to wonder if maybe this time is different, but the elders call them back, remind them of the rule written after the third false alarm. Answer only for blood, never for noise. They wait for proof that doesn't require faith, proof that can't be faked, proof that will never arrive because the boy has no voice. Behind them all, behind closed doors and shuttered windows, families recite the new rule like prayer. Answer only for blood. They teach it to their children. They write it on slips of paper and tuck it in their pockets. They've learned their lessons so well that they've forgotten why lessons exist in the first place. Not to make you smart, but to keep you alive. Back on the hill, the wolf slides through the fence slats like water through a sieve. Its body doesn't have fixed dimensions. Sometimes it's solid enough to leave tracks, Sometimes it's transparent enough to see through, existing in multiple states simultaneously. The sheep break into stillness, that terrible frozen pose animals adopt when death is certain and flight is futile. They don't run, they just stand there, waiting. The boy throws himself between the wolf and the flock. No weapon, no voice, nothing but his body and the memory of a bargain. The wolf could kill him easily, should kill him by all the rules of these stories, but instead it does something worse. It opens its mouth, shows teeth like broken promises, and bites the echo where his cry would be, swallows the sound instead of the flesh, takes the warning he can no longer speak and consumes it, pulls it down into whatever passes for its stomach. The sheep shiver but remain untouched. Not a single one bleeds, but the pen grows quieter, like someone has wrapped it in velvet, and when morning comes there will be fewer footsteps in the dirt than there were the night before. Not fewer sheep. The count will still be wrong, still cycling through impossible numbers, but fewer signs that anyone was there at all. Dawn arrives, like it always does, indifferent to tragedy or transformation. No bodies, no blood. The fence is intact. The sheep are alive, technically, though they move differently now, like they're being operated by someone who's only read descriptions of sheep behaviour without actually seeing it. The dog returns from wherever it hid and follows the boy at a distance, confused, unwilling to get too close to whatever he's become. When the boy tries to speak, nothing carries. His lips move, his tongue shapes words, air passes through his throat, but the sound stops at the boundary of his skin. He can talk only to the wolf now, the only creature that hears him, and even then it's less conversation and more call and response. He says something, the wolf repeats it, and together they make one complete voice. The elders climb the hill that morning to check on the flock, not because they heard anything, but because sunrise has come and gone without any sign of the shepherd. They find the boy alive, the sheep accounted for, though the count makes no sense, and evidence that troubles them. The bell's stone groove carved across the church floor, the cloth wrapper bitten through by something with human incisors, and tracks that start nowhere and end nowhere else. They hold an emergency meeting, these elders who thought they'd solved the problem of false alarms with their clever rule. They pass the torn cloth around, examine the bite marks, trace the strange groove with their fingers, and slowly, reluctantly, they realise they've taught themselves too well. They've built a system that can't distinguish between boy who lies and boy who tells truth because they've made both invisible. A new rule gets posted on the church door, carved into wood so it can't be ignored or forgotten. Answer once, even for a liar. Answer twice, even for a fool. Answer thrice, even for a ghost. 3 chances, 3 responses. A recognition that reliability isn't binary, that people contain multitudes, that the truth-tellers and liars are often the same person at different times. It's too late to save what was, but maybe it'll prevent the next erasure. Maybe it'll keep the next lonely shepherd from bargaining with things that wear voices like clothing. The boy doesn't come down from the hill anymore. Evening after evening, villagers catch glimpses of 2 figures walking the fence line together. A boy-shaped shadow and a wolf-shaped emptiness, moving in parallel, keeping something in and keeping something else out. They walk opposite sides of the same boundary, mirror images, dependent on each other in ways that make watchers uncomfortable. The boy's mouth moves constantly, silently, and the wolf speaks what he cannot, giving voice to warnings nobody else can hear. Together they form one complete alarm system, one guardian split between 2 bodies. The sheep are safe, technically. The wolves stay away from the fold, though whether that's because of the boy or because of the thing that wears his voice, no one can say. The village remains protected by something that's no longer quite human, but hasn't fully transformed into monster, caught in the space between like all the best horrors, neither one thing nor another. A traveller passes through one evening just as the sun is setting, turning the sky the colour of old bruises. He's heading to the next village over, following the road that curves around the base of the hill, and he doesn't know the local stories or local rules. So when he reaches the curve, he does what any friendly traveller would do, calls out a greeting. "Hello!" The hill answers perfectly. "Hello," comes back in a voice that sounds young and eager and entirely human, the kind of voice that belongs to a boy who still believes people will answer when he calls. But the traveller, who has good instincts for wrong things, notices that the echo arrives too quickly, notices that it comes from the tree line, not from the hill itself, notices that something thin and grey is moving between the pines, trying on the shape of his greeting, testing how it fits. He doesn't stop walking, doesn't look back, just quickens his pace and tells himself it was wind, just wind, though he knows better. Behind him, in the pine gloom where the last light doesn't reach, something practices saying his name, gets the syllables almost right, waits to see if the village has learned its lesson yet, waits to see if they'll answer the first time or the second, or if they'll wait until it's too late and there's nothing left but echoes wearing fur. The boy watches from his pen, voiceless but not powerless, and the wolf speaks for him. Run. The traveller runs, and somewhere in the village below someone hears. Someone opens a door, someone lights a torch, not because they verified the alarm first, but because the new rule says the answer 3 times, even for ghosts, and the first answer cost nothing but a moment of faith. The thing in the trees hears that door open, sees that torch bloom, and retreats back into shadow where it belongs. Not defeated, things like this don't die or surrender, but acknowledged, seen, answered, and that's the moral if you're looking for one. Call for help when you need it, yes, but also answer when you're called, even if, especially if, you've been fooled before. Because the cost of being wrong is embarrassment and wasted time, but the cost of being right and ignored is everything else. The boy who cried, Wolf learned his lesson, the village learned theirs, and the wolf learned that names have power, that voices can be stolen, that the space between call and response is where monsters breed. It's still up there, still walking the fence with the boy who can't speak and won't leave, still keeping the bargain they made in the mist when loneliness and desperation made a fairy tale turn real. So if you're ever passing through a village with a stone bell and a hill crowned with pine, and you hear someone call your name from the tree line just as the sun sets, remember, answer. The first time, the second time, even the third. Because somewhere up there, a boy with no voice is trying to warn you, and a wolf with his voice is trying to lure you, and the only way to tell the difference is to risk being wrong. That's the price of living in a world where stories don't end cleanly, where morals sprawl into meanings no one wanted, where the punishment for lying isn't poetic justice, but something far stranger that wears your words like a second skin and waits in the spaces between echoes for someone new to teach.